Everybody, how are you? Are you ready to end day one? I am ready to end day one, if I'm being honest. Thank you for staying behind. Thank you for being here. My name is Jeff Knepper, and I am your reluctant Fireside Chat host. Thank you. I have got a distinguished group of panelists beside me. Let's go Matthew Paris. Matthew is the Director of Advanced Manufacturing for GE Appliances. Beside him, Jonathan Wise. Jonathan is the Chief Technology Architect for SESME. If you don't know who the gentleman on your far left is, the exit door. Can I get a round of applause for Arlen Dipper? And I think that rounds out our group, right? All right, so I thought we'd start out with a little bit of fun. I'm just curious. Actually, do me a favor, if you would. Can we thank Echodyne for sponsoring this event? Echodyne. Sure.
Constantine out here?
Constantine, are you here? Where are you, Constantine?
Over here.
Thank you. So Constantine and Echodyne, they are the architects of the UNS chatbot. And that helps you run your factory literally by talking to it. You can get a feel of what that looks like. I'm sure they're ready to show you a demo. They are over at booth 22. Echodyne, Constantine and the team, the chatbot. Go check it out, please.
Thank you, Constantine.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Now, we're going to have a little bit of fun. I need you to scan the QR code. It's going to unlock a little quiz for you. As you're doing that, I want you to think about your first worst job. Very few of you came out of engineering school and just started slaying it. I was a dishwasher for a summer at a church camp. I was up to my elbows in spaghetti plates. It was gross, $5 an hour. But amongst our esteemed panelists, we have quite the sordid history of terrible first jobs. And I would absolutely love to see what you think, based on our panelists, who spent 500 miles of painting pipeline road crossings. We're really leaning hard on Arlen. Okay, that was a gimme. That was a gimme. Fair enough. All right, I think we all know it's Arlen. So Arlen, that was from Medford, Oklahoma to Houston, Texas.
To Mont Bellevue.
You hand-painted pipeline crosswords.
Yep.
Okay.
Cleaned all the weeds out, painted the post, and drove to the next pipeline crossing.
All right.
Somebody's got to do it.
Somebody's got to do it. All right, next question, please. Who went? Now, we're not going to reveal the answer on these next three until the end. Who do you think went from McDonald's drive-through greeter, order taker, to pinball repairman? And this is what jump-started their career, by the way.
This looks like an AI chatbot trying to figure out confidences and answers.
I like it. I like it. All right, 5 seconds. You're not going to reason this out. Go with your gut. All right, let's go on to the next question. Who manned the prime rib carving station at the local country club? And bonus, that was Friday night. Sunday, they were flipping omelets. That's cross-discipline training.
Interesting.
Jonathan, they like you with a carving knife.
I like some prime rib.
All right, and final question. This is my favorite. Who started as a Taco Bell mascot? And by the way, this was on center. This was on center ice at the hockey rink, but quickly pivoted, go figure, to doing computer repair for grandmas. All right. So with the panelists who started off with that beautiful smile and award-winning personality at McDonald's turned pinball wizard, please stand up.
It is me, actually. It is, yeah. And I will say that my certification as a pinball repairman was in 5-volt DC systems and learning how to read IEC drawings, which is the reason my supervisor at Cargill sent me to fix that roof bolter, because the drawings were in German and they used the IEC standard, and I went with the electrician and fixed the roof bolter, and that was the beginning of my career.
Yeah, there you go.
Okay.
Go standards.
All right, so that gives you two choices. Is it going to be Matthew or Jonathan? I have to know. Who was the Taco Bell mascot turned grandma IT repair professional?
Was it really?
So here, my question is, what does a Taco Bell mascot look like? Tell me it's a Chihuahua.
No, it was a giant taco. Yeah.
Okay. Well done. Hey, listen, just you want the little motivational inspiration speech from this little bit of knowledge, no matter where you find yourself. It could be worse. No, but seriously, take what you have, right, and do something with it. From painting pipelines to automating pipelines to inventing, frankly, the protocol that has us here today, to organizing why we're here today, based on what you learned in a hobby turned career.
Yep.
IT background certainly served you well. I'm still trying to connect the omelet. GE appliances, of course.
Of course. Yes.
All right, so hey, listen, we have a goal today, and it's to talk about data standards and their role in your day-to-day lives, what they mean for you as you're trying to go through a digital transformation, how they can help, and how they can hurt. But I think it would be really helpful before we start that we just define some terms. So I want to float a couple terms to the group, and then I just want you to speak to how you would use that term to explain it to, how about a freshman engineer or a junior engineer right out of college? And we're going to start with, what is a namespace? What is a namespace?
Anybody care to go?
Well, I mean, ultimately, that was the cool thing about MQTT, is that when I look back at it, you had to have a topic to be able to publish your data. And even though, one of the radical things about MQTT is, okay, it's on TCP/IP, we're not polling anymore, we can just push stuff out, report by exception. That was great. But really what came along with it was the fact that, okay, I got a piece of data, but I got metadata in front of it. And really that was the namespace. And we kind of took that for granted for a long time, I think, until it started percolating down that, oh, well, if we organize that right, we can make a UNS. So really not so much the namespace, but when I think about it, it was interesting. Phillips 66, we had basically a UNS, because when we did, we had pipeline 1, pipeline 2, we had booster station 1, we had pump number 1, and the PLC number 1. So we had a mini, basically, UNS, even when we did MQTT for Philips in 1999.
I always describe the namespace as the thing, it's the representation of a organization of data, but the model is irrelevant. It is the place it lives within its representation. So it's the thing inside the brackets. I always say it's the thing, it's the object, the sub-object inside of a JSON, excuse me. But the namespace is supposed to tell you its representation within relative to other data. That's what I always say.
I would modify it just a little. We use namespace as the declaration of the definition of the data. So what's really important is that although the data may travel with its namespace, the namespace is a definition independent of any one expression of the data, independent of an instance of the data.
So if I could say it back to you, I can understand a namespace without ever understanding a value of data.
Correct. Yeah. I can infer a namespace by looking at key value pairs, but I can independently understand a namespace by looking at its definition.
Okay. Yes. So then what about a data model?
Data model, I'll take a stab at that, is objects that have members tied to those objects. And so a data model is you're creating this entity that would then reside within a namespace. So a namespace is going to collect all your objects together, and those objects have certain definitions for them. And so you're going to have object definitions. Think of them like class definitions if you're programming code. You have your class definitions, and then you're instantiating them within namespaces.
And what's important to note about data models is that they are limited to events that can be associated with values and moments and when those values transitioned, as opposed to informational models, which give you context where you can make decisions.
Okay.
I like that distinction. Typically, we would define the data model as being more primitive than the information model. The information model is enriched with the context. The data model exists, but it's an information model when we have that complete context.
You can't have an information model without a data model.
Correct.
Maybe data model, UDT,
Right.
information model is going to be higher up the stack.
Oh, so using maybe if you were familiar with Ignition, a UDT at its base would be a data model.
Correct.
Right, before it's instantiated.
Yeah.
Once it's instantiated and you put a topic namespace in front of it,
Now
now
it's
you're
information.
publishing that into the UNS.
Okay. Jonathan, I think if memory serves, 3 years ago at a SESME event, I saw an example of a data model almost being like the nameplate of a piece of equipment. Is that accurate?
Yeah, that is a data model.
Okay.
Yeah, and it would need to exist inside a larger information model. Just a nameplate isn't that useful unless I know what it belongs to and what it's doing. But yeah, I think that's fair.
But a capacity or a horsepower,
Sure.
but not a production for the last hour.
Yeah, yeah. Not current horsepower, but rated horsepower.
Yes.
Okay. Data standards?
I'll go first. So there are standards and then there are standards, right? So Walker referred to an IEC standard for pinball machines. So that's the highest level of standards, typically international standards agreed on by a standards body, arrived at via consensus, and available hopefully to a wide array of users. But data standard could have a lower bar as well, which is organizationally, this is how we have decided to structure or name our data. So there's a ton of kind of synergies or similarities with a UNS.
Yeah, data standard, I think, is going to take multiple contexts based on where you're talking about it. So you could have within your own organization, you have a need for a standard. And I would say this, the need is anytime you have an interface between two things. So they could be two organizations in your company where one is producing information or data, the other needs that information. You need a standard of this is what I need to produce to then consume. And if you change that standard, then you're going to break my consumption of it. It could be a definition, an interface that's defined between your organization and an outside organization. If we talk about digital supply chains or supply chains that are feeding you material and then you're producing parts that are being downstream, you may need to communicate information or data to those as well. And if you don't have a standard, you're going to find yourself in trouble pretty quickly when somebody makes some change.
At its base level, a data standard is the rules and options for consuming, producing, structuring, and then sending and receiving data across the wire.
Correct.
At its base level.
Yeah.
So that, I mean, if we didn't have one where we had hardwired phones, which you guys are probably not, you're probably the one who looks funny with a rotary dial phone, like you don't know how to use it. I do remember how that worked, but you know, that was all a series of switches, right? It was just, you know, and it was click, 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 a series of switches. Without a standard, then there was no way that you could take a phone, put it on the wire and turn the rotary and have it communicate to the switch the number you were trying to call. So I think we complicate data standards too much. Where we really get into, protocol standards are where things get complex. Data standards are pretty straightforward.
Before MQTT, I sat on the Heart Communications Foundation.
One of the greatest, by the way, protocols, in my opinion,
exactly,
of all time.
Exactly, but nobody uses it.
That's right.
Right? So you talk about digital transformation and the fact that we've got 200, 300, 400 points of data in a HeartSmart transmitter, and we're leaving it stuck out in the field, and we bring a 4 to 20 milliamp signal back, right? And that's my point. That was my frustration with the Heart Foundation, is like they were so entrenched, and it was so specific that it never got out to the public, right? So there's the problem of a data standard or protocol that's out there. It's the greatest thing since sliced bread, but nobody uses it.
Yeah, and I think standardization, really you need to look at what are my interfaces where I need a standard. I think the idea or the way we need to standardize for standardization's sake is not a good approach. I think you're going to create this initiative that's too heavy, and it's going to die under its own weight.
I'm a huge fan of, I'm a huge fan of the Walt Disney philosophy of standardization. Right? When Walt Disney created Disneyland, which was the only amusement park he ever saw, some of you have heard the story, but the team asked him where should he put the sidewalks, and where should we put the sidewalks in Disneyland? And he said, we're not going to put in sidewalks. We're going to put in grass, and we're going to wait a year. And then wherever the path is beaten down, we're going to put in sidewalks. And I agree. I believe in that philosophy, that where we should standardize is where the path is beaten down.
Yep.
And when we have a conversation about where are we in the need for standards in IIoT and Industry 4 and UNS, my opinion is that we're still in the primordial soup stage, maybe a little past that. Some elements have bubbled up and we have carbon and we have helium and we have hydrogen, but we don't have the full periodic table yet. And the question is, how many elements do you need before it's time to start standardizing? And I think we're pretty close. And I think the work that you guys are doing right now, which I hope we touch on at some point, is very important work.
Yeah, and I would say data standards. Let's talk about one that we all use, the internet.
Right.
If we want to go get information from the entire world, we all know how to go do that. You open up your web browser in your computer or your phone, type in that URL, and then you immediately have information. We don't have that as an industry today. That does not exist. If you talk to any integrator and they're brought into a customer and help us solve our problem, the first question there says, well, how can I get at your data? Maybe if the integrator's lucky, there's an API that they can get to. Maybe there's some protocol like an OPC UA or an MQTT or, for heaven's sake, Modbus, if that's all that there is. Or maybe it's just hardwired I/O. But the fact that we even have to ask that question, 30 years after we have standardized how to get information from the entire world, is ridiculous in my mind. And I think it's time that we all agree on this is how we're going to get information from software that's at this certain level of the stack, and then be done with it so we can move on and solve really interesting problems.
If I could, I'd like to torture both of your analogies. So I love the idea of like pave the paths people are walking on. I think to torture that analogy further, Disney also famously had a monorail, and there had to be a standard in place for that train to fit on so it could travel down it. So there are cases where we take advantage of a standard that already exists. To take your analogy a little further, HTTP and HTML gave us the internet and massively accelerated technology, but it also breaks down when systems need to interchange data, because HTTP and HTML only go so far in describing the data that may be transmitted over the wire. And after those 30 years, now we have LLMs beginning to make sense of a massive corpus of unstructured data. So there is a place where we need to use standards that exist, even if they're not perfect. And I deal with that every day. Lots of standards aren't perfect, but they are accelerators that can let us move on to other problems that actually matter.
But imperfection is okay as long as it's not prohibitive. My argument has always been, I'm okay with an imperfect standard as long as me working with an imperfect standard doesn't prohibit me from A, solving the problem, and B, innovating. And I think where we get into the area of the semantic, the protocol wars and the standards wars is when one group believes that a standard is prohibitive to both solving the problem and innovating. And I think where we are right now, think about what this show is all about. I mean, I can't state this enough. Fucking 5 years ago, we couldn't have done this. Think about it, 39 companies, 36 vendors, 36 use cases, 45 million messages per hour on a 10-year-old server, and everybody was given 16 weeks, and every single thing that was produced is of value to this manufacturer. Think about that, it boggles the mind, and guess what? There's only one standard being used, and it is a simple standard that is MQTT 3.1.1 and MQTT 5, right? Now, I will say to this point, we are using OPC UA. We have OPC consuming MQTT, and we are serving out the UNS over OPC UA. But I wrote that server. I chose to write the server so that I could use the minimal elements of OPC UA because there were some things that I wanted to do. I think where we are, and this is the work that you guys are doing that's so important, is future state, it's not even future state, it's current state for many manufacturers like Tesla. The idea is that I'm going to take a namespace, data model, data standards, information models, and I'm going to land an asset on a plant floor, and I'm going to point it to an infrastructure, to a place in the ontology, which is the next word, and it is just going to start publishing into the infrastructure. And you want to know where we need standards? How to organize the data on that asset we landed on the floor before we pointed to the infrastructure. And that's the profiles you guys are working on. That profile standard at SESME it serves an important role in us being able to achieve that. Because if I'm going to land a grinder on the plant floor in plant A, and I'm going to land a grinder on the plant floor in plant B for customer B, and they're going to publish into a digital supply chain, we should be able to identify that they're both grinders. And you can't do that without a standard.
Yeah, 100% aligned with that vision of the machine comes on, it registers with the infrastructure, and I can discover what it is.
Yep.
The part I think needs to happen is that I need to know what it is before it starts broadcasting its data. I need to have that data definition, that data standard, independent of the machine first turning on, because I need to be ready for it when it gets
or can you send it when it first turns on? Can you send the definition over the wire, right? And that's where you guys are.
And I think it depends on the use case. So let's say I'm a UI developer, and the customer says, I need a dashboard for the grinder.
Yeah.
Well, tell me your data model.
Yeah.
Send that to me. I'm going to build the dashboard off that data model. And when I see that type come across the wire,
I know how
I've
to
got your
bind to it.
dashboard.
Right.
Yeah.
And we call that self-aware.
That's right.
Right.
Yeah.
Right now, that's non-standardized, right? It's like I have to control the data model, the information model, and the template that's consuming all three in order to do self-aware visualization, but without standardization.
We do that to a large extent. We have UDTs in Ignition. We can publish those with Sparkplug. I would love for machines, I mean, my vision is, we don't have middleware. You turn on the machine and it publishes all of the information that you need, to your point. But the problem that I wrestle with on that is like an OPC UA definition, is that if I went to all the customers that I've got and said, are you using the OPC UA model for a centrifugal pump? And the answer is no. They don't even know they've never even heard of it. So my problem with that is the worst thing to do is to come out with like companion spec that OPC UA has. They're all sitting over here. Nobody uses them.
Yeah, I think if we look
why is that? Before we move on, why isn't anybody using what's already defined?
I would argue It goes back to when do you define an interface? And I would argue that you need to serve the consumer. And in this case, it's whatever application needs the data. So if the application that needs the data doesn't use this standard or use this companion spec, then why would I build it?
And if you don't have the foresight, standards really help with scale, right? If scale and deployment, right? If I don't have the foresight, in the beginning when we're in this 16-week stage, it's a Wild West. We can do whatever we want.
Right.
I mean, we can just nuke it after. But when we decide we're going to scale to 50 plants and 50,000 assets, right? And we're going to do change management. Shout out to Emma Roloff. We're going to do change management on those 50,000 assets because we're going to make a change to the model, this ad hoc model that we originally created for our tank. How do you deploy that to, if I've got 50,000 tanks and I've made a change in the model, how do you deploy it to 50,000 models, right? I mean, at the end of the day, I believe standards should be optional and adoption should be the choice of the consumer. This is where we talk about heterogeneous and homogeneous development. You hear me talk about it all the time. Homogeneous development is, in UNS, is if I create a namespace that I define as homogeneous, it's red, it means it's not optional. But I can extend it with a blue namespace, which is ad hoc, which is optional. So I can have standard dot extension, which is Matt's extension. I didn't break the rule of the standard, right? If I send it to the consumer understands, oh, that is a standard tank object. It's got some extra shit. I'm going to ignore the extra shit, and I'm going to consume just what I need. But what I've done now is I have standard living alongside non-standard. That was the beauty. When you gave your presentation at Inductive Automation at ICC in 2014, I don't mean to hijack, but when you gave your presentation in 2014, I mean, we've told this story a million times. You know, Arlen's up on stage and he deployed, I don't remember how many PLCs it was, but we take it for granted now that we can do this. But when he showed at ICC that he could deploy 500 PLCs and populate ignition tags and visualize them on the screen, and he did it all in like 10 seconds, I was the first guy up to the front talking on the mic, turning back
in front of me, by the way.
In front of everybody and saying our world just changed. Like it just changed. You know what I mean? And part of the reason it changed was because what I saw in that moment wasn't just the edge-driven, self-aware component of it, which is obviously incredibly powerful. It was also standard with non-standard together, because I knew the mechanism you were using was, hey, I can recognize the pattern in the standard part, and I can accept that there's a non-standard component to it.
That's really important there, and that's getting into the real computer science of namespaces. There was a question asked, and I made Walker promise me I wouldn't be the OPC-UA whipping boy, but it's a good question that should be answered. In IT software, when we develop a namespace, we make it up out of classes. Class definitions make up the namespace. Classes belong to a namespace. Classes are composed of subclasses. And that composition that allows us to put together parts that are standardized with parts that are not yet standardized with parts that will never be standardized, that composition that makes up a namespace is a really important part of defining a namespace. And to your pointed question, Arlen, the 160 companion specifications that have been published that are profiles of pieces of equipment or parts of pieces of equipment were initially developed as monolithic, homogeneous namespaces. It was take it or leave it, right? You need this whole thing or you can have none of it.
Right.
And that's not how we build namespaces. Namespaces are these organic things where we iterate and learn. So you'll see the foundation and the supporting organizations like the VDMA begin to decompose these things. Like, here is a standard based on ISA 95 for job control that has been expressed as a modular profile that can be implemented by machines that may or may not fulfill other standards. If we can break these things down into parts, then when I connect to a broker, I can begin to recognize the parts that are standardized and bind to them automatically. There will be parts that are not globally standardized that maybe I can't, maybe my vendor needs to do that for me, but we can start to have these repeatable Lego blocks that build up our architectures and make them interoperable.
Yes.
And I think the key to a good Applause for
you go, buddy.
this. So the key to, I think, interoperability in our industry is, to use Sparkplug as an example, it was great about standardizing a lot of the stack. So if you think about on top of TCP, they standardized MQTT, how to use MQTT, because you could use it in 1,000 different ways.
Yep.
And if two people are trying to use it, they may not work together. So they standardized how to use MQTT. They standardized the encoding to use on top of MQTT because that's left wide open. You could send binary, bitmaps, ASCII, whatever you want. It standardized variable definition on how to structure your payload within the encoding. And they stopped there. They said, well, and then also on top of that, we'll have a mechanism for you to define a template. And they left it wide open. They said, okay, we'll stop right there. That's very powerful to automate that much of the ingestion when you're trying to consume data. I think, but there's some limitations there. Like if I want to query an endpoint to say what data is available there from right now for me to use, I can't do that in Sparkplug. The only mechanism I have is to subscribe, see some data, and then I issue some nbursts to then start to see the data.
And to be clear, an nbirth is like unto a class definition.
Yes.
I'm asking the object what its class is.
Yeah, it's an in-band way to communicate a namespace, which is
A
perfectly
partial
valid.
namespace even, right?
Sure,
Yeah.
sure. So in terms of being able to query or to be able to read a specific value,
So for those of you, just so not everybody is familiar with.
Did we get too nerdy?
With Sparkplug. So
Jeff, you're supposed to be helping us out here.
right, so
I will need a break in the conversation to interject to help you out.
So obviously Arlen is the expert here, Owen and Wes are the expert, but I'll just, in layman's terms, the beauty of Sparkplug is that on the first connection from the client, we are publishing structure. Okay, we are saying this is, all of my communications to you are going to be based on this structure. And that is very flexible, okay? It is encoded. There's a whole host of other things. And then as I update, as long as I don't break the rules on the original structure I sent to you, I didn't send a death message and I didn't send a rebirth message, I promise that all the things I send to you are going to be on that first structure I sent to you. Right, that's Sparkplug. Sparkplug also has the ability to also publish definitions, which are called templates, and they can say, I have templates within this structure, and those templates might be UDTs, and here is how you deconstruct those to the client. That's Sparkplug in a nutshell. I actually come from the school of, and I think Arlen, Wes, and I probably agree here, because I know Arlen and you guys could have gone further with Sparkplug A and B, but clearly chose not to go farther. In fact, you went further with A and B.
Right.
You went to a point with A, and then you said, okay, well maybe and you held yourself back, and then you said, oh, we'll go a little further with B, and you went a little bit further with B, and I actually think had you gone further, you would have had a negative impact on adoption.
Exactly.
Right? I think you would have had a negative impact. And so at the end of the day, but we are at a point, everyone agrees, the community now understands, okay, I've identified these limitations of Sparkplug, and you know them as well as anybody, right? I mean,
We know.
Yeah.
We know.
And now it's what
You're
do we do
helping
about
the
it?
industry iterate and learn.
Yes,
All right.
exactly. What do we do about it? That's the question at the end of the day.
But it's super obvious if you ask any of the vendors that integrated into this ProveIt infrastructure, how fast was it for you to subscribe to the MQTT flat, assume JSON, versus if you had a consumer that understood Sparkplug, when you subscribe to the Sparkplug namespace, how fast was it to get data there?
Oh, sorry,
I remember in the Discord, you said, yep, we're publishing Sparkplug, and then it was Opto22 that said, yep, we've got it. It was like just like
Sparkplug was clearly the superior integration mechanism for ProveIt.
And the reason for that is because they had a standard up the stack.
Yep.
You don't have to ask these questions about how did you do this? How did you do this? It's
Because
just
if you go
a
and you
given.
look at, if you go out to the touch screen, you can navigate the UNS. You can see all the various vendors and how they package their payloads. Some are using Sparkplug, but not many. And so if you go to Atanta Analytics, for example, who's in the flat MQTT namespace, it is the Wild West. It is the Atanta standard. But if you go to Sparkplug, it is the Sparkplug standard, and they all follow the rules of group ID and node ID. But again, one of the complaints that we've always had about Sparkplug is that Sparkplug was really meant to be device-centric, right? The edge node was meant to be a representation of a device, but it became more and more apparent, wow, if it were instrument, if we had the option of it being device and or instrument-centric, it would be so much more powerful. I am an instrument or I am a device, but we don't, and that has to do with the group.
Well, that was the name, that was what we
Right.
came up with
Right.
at the time. And that had come, the Sparkplug spec, okay. When Andy and I invented Sparkplug, I was a CTO for Arcom, and we had a little red box called an Arcom director, and that's what we were using for protocol converters out in the field. So the first implementation of MQTT for Phillips 66, John Lujan and I wrote our own, right? We completely off the wall. But we had the notion of a birth. We modeled the data as Modbus data, but it was binary so we could smash it down. And that was so efficient for Phillips 66. In fact, they're still using it today. But the model of Sparkplug A, where I started, I modeled it after what we had done 25 years ago.
Can I want to just put a pin and stay on the Sparkplug vein, but first, can we recognize the vendors and particularly end users that are in the room that are part of the working group, that are contributing, that have said, yes, we will back Sparkplug?
Is that a self-plug?
No.
No, it should be.
No. But if you're a vendor in the room, I don't want to miss any. So this is kind of off the cuff.
Oh,
But
okay.
Inductive automation,
Opto,
Opto 22, Canary's here,
right?
Hive,
Yes.
Chevron I don't think is here,
Nope.
but a huge part. Who else?
I mean, HiByte ingests Sparkplug, so you got HiByte.
I'm looking for working group members.
Oh,
Working group
The
members.
Sparkplug working group.
Making
yeah.
a financial pledge, making a time commitment pledge.
Yeah. I think that's it that are here.
Well, I'll say this. I get a lot of complaints about Sparkplug, and I always say, talk to Arlen and Wes. But what I'll say is, why don't you join the working group?
Yeah.
I mean, if you
do.
have an objection.
And, no,
Okay.
you do. You
yeah.
do.
Yeah.
And that's
Join the working group.
And that's my point, because what I'm hearing is Sparkplug could fix a lot of problems in our need for a standard for fast UNS connectivity with understanding of payload. But it's not perfect.
Well, I would say that what I would argue, and I haven't talked to John Dyke about this in any way, any capacity. We had a great conversation last year at Operations Calling. John is the guy who heads up SESME, and he's the chief technical architect at SESME. If you guys don't know, SESME is the Institute for Smart Manufacturing. You know, it's federally funded, United States. You know, it's all about creating standards for smart manufacturing. You know, I actually believe, if you want to know my opinion, where a standard is going to land, it's going to land at the intersection of what you guys are doing with profiles at SESME and what the Sparkplug Working Group is doing for the mechanism of transporting standards. Imagine you had the mechanism that we're using, that you use with Sparkplug, but yet what we're first sending in that initial message is a profile from.
I believe
Yeah, SESME profile.
Travis Cox already took the profile from SESME, and we're publishing that in Sparkplug.
Yeah, Travis can already ingest a standards-based profile
exactly,
and then fulfill it with the
exactly.
Sparkplug message.
Yep.
Yeah.
So where I see where it needs to head is an API. How many APIs do we have in all the software that we have on the floor here? Like, how many vendors do we have? And that's like at least how many APIs we have?
Yeah.
I would love, as an end user, to say, I have one API definition. I have a piece of software, and I'm going to connect to that one type of API, and I'm going to be able to browse for what data that piece of software has available to me. I'm going to be able to read data. I'm going to be able to write data and subscribe to data and read historical data. Like, is there any more functions that we really need as an industry? And if I could standardize all that in a single API, as a single endpoint, I'm going to connect, bring up your application, you browse, here's all the stuff. Yeah, that's interesting, subscribe, have some rules. I want to query for types of this model. We talked about data models, so I'm interested in this piece of software if it has data regarding model pump, and I want to query and give back to me all the pumps that exist. And now I'm going to subscribe to pumps.power because I'm interested in aggregating all the power of the pumps. To me, there's no technical reason why we can't do that today, 30 years beyond where the internet has been
I'll
subscribed.
introduce you to the Eclipse Foundation.
Here you go.
And you can start a working group.
We actually already have a working group.
Yeah, let's talk more about that.
Perfect. Yeah.
Okay.
So if we can standardize the class definition so that we can exchange class definitions, and if we can standardize the transmission of the data, we will have solved two big problems in our industry. We are at risk, as Matthew's calling out, of moving one of those problems up a layer. So instead of having protocol wars, if we can put that behind us, we need to avoid having API wars, where everybody's contextual information platform has a different way of interfacing with that data. So the Eclipse Foundation is one potential recipient of another working group's effort that Matthew's referring to standardize those APIs. And I think if we can get that trifecta, we can move this industry significantly forward.
Matt, myself, and Rick Bellata have a DM, an ongoing DM on Discord. The three of us, and I don't know, it's a year old now, right?
Give context on who Rick Bellata is for some.
Rick.
Are you on LinkedIn?
Yeah. So Rick Bellata is one of the OGs. Honestly, if I'm being honest, Rick's probably done more. He has been more consequential to our industry than any other individual person I can think of, other than Arlen. And I'm not pandering. Arlen, what you and Andy did, fucking changed the world, dude, for real. Legitimately. But you name a consequential product that shifted the direction of our industry over the last 25 years, and Rick Bellata had a hand on it. I'm telling you, when you think SAP MII, when you look at Wonderware version 10, when you look at PTC's ThingWorks. Yeah, Rick he's been an architect and had his hand on it. He's the asshole on LinkedIn who's always picking fights, and he's a big investor in tech companies. But behind the scenes, Rick really cares about what's going on, and he's the invisible hand in a lot of ways. Myself, Matt, and Rick have been having this ongoing conversation about standards right before you joined the working group, and a lot of the conversation, what you just said, is a lot of you and Rick. You guys talking about here are the must-haves.
Right.
These are the things we absolutely have to have if we're going to standardize. What I want to go back to just an original point here. There is a running joke in our industry that you think about where every working group comes from, right? Every new standard is designed to fill a vacuum. And myself as an executive, when I take a 10,000-foot purview, I look and I say, we can prevent vacuums. The vacuum doesn't have to be there. And the way that you eliminate vacuums is you eliminate restriction. Right? Unless I have hermetically sealed tank, I can't create a permanent vacuum inside that tank. If I allow the tank to expand and contract, and I leave enough flexibility, there's a shape there, but I leave enough flexibility, then I'm not going to create a vacuum where someone's going to defect from OPC-UA, and they're going to, from the OPC Foundation, and they're going to go create their own standards body. And our industry is littered with those examples. They're everywhere. And so I believe the long-term solution is let's all stay a little flexible, right? Let's not over-standardize, but I think we're at a point where we must standardize. This is the reason I'm a huge proselytizer or spark plug is because of its flexibility. Right? It's just enough standard. Just enough.
You've got 400 end users in the room. What do they go home and do to help this process?
Ooh.
So for me, I joined the SESME API working group. How long has it been ongoing effort?
Since November.
Okay, so I joined in November is when I found out about it. The beauty of it is it is being developed on GitHub. You can go to github.com/sesme/API. The spec will be there, and if you don't like something, open up a GitHub issue. That will be read by the working group, and it will be answered on GitHub. It's not being developed in closed doors. It's not being developed by ideas from select, system matter experts that we choose. It really is an open standard in terms of going through the development process.
Well, I don't think it could be even more open.
No.
I mean, if you were to say, how are we going to make it more open? I'm not sure how you would do it.
I'm like, Jonathan, are you sure you're ready to receive the onslaught of
onslaught, right? Yeah.
Who knows what somebody's going to publish on GitHub? But that's the point, is that we need to hear these ideas, because I would love to fix this once and for all and not have to question it ever again, because there's so many more problems that we really need to be solving, where parsing data and parsing information, that's just stuff that needs to get automated.
And think about the issue here. Without the level 1, level 2, level 3 standards, right, as we move up the stack, if L5 in the cloud is where digital supply chain is going to take place, where I'm going to be able to turn an entity, an enterprise and all of its subclasses into an object, a digital object that I can then put onto the digital supply chain so that it can interact with other objects, we have to go through the L1, L2, L3. Those are the subclasses of that larger object. Right. And if the goal is digital supply chain, and it is, if you want to know Tesla's, real, mandate, it is, if you are a supplier of ours, you are in our ecosystem. You are on Warp. Tesla doesn't get on the phone and call Saint-Gobain about how many passenger windows they've manufactured to put in the Model 3. They already know. In fact, they're predicting how many they're going to have as they're rolling cars off the line a month from now. They're on a digital supply chain, but what it is Tesla created the standard. And then they're just making their suppliers adhere to it. That is not the future. The future is an open standard that all of industry is adopting.
So my challenge to everyone here is go on GitHub, get involved in the Sesame API. If you're an end user and you're seeing something that, that's not going to work because of my experience in X, Y, and Z, make that known. If you're a system integrator, let us know why what we're planning to do is not going to work because of your experience with this project. If you're a vendor, tell us why it's not going to work with your product, because all three of those are going to align for this. The schedule for this is to release the definition in November. And I would love more than anything is to see it ProveIt 2026. Next year, all the vendors are integrated around this API to more readily automate the ingestion of that information, both real-time telemetry and the historical data. And there's going to be lots of ways to get that data and information into those softwares, but then to exchange that between the vendors would be fantastic to see that done in the standard way.
And I'd affirm that and broaden it. So not just the API, but if you are building your UNS, if you're on your industry transformation, it is fair to say this standard doesn't work for me, but it's not fair to say that if you haven't tried it, if you haven't provided the feedback to the working group that's guiding these things. I don't know if Arlen wants the email directly for Sparkplug B, but we do need the feedback. I sit on about 6 working groups, and our primary job is to understand the industry consensus, the industry feedback, and try to steer the standards towards things that can be useful, that can allow interoperability, and we can't get there in a vacuum.
Yeah, I would always say this, just like all of you who are integrators or your solutions providers, there's a rule I have for all of my teams and all of my students. And that is, you should never build a solution that makes the operator's job harder. You should never make more work for them. And what I say to standards bodies is, you shouldn't write a standard that makes using the standard harder than not using the standard.
Agreed.
Right? Yep. There you go.
Agreed.
Arlen, would you prefer that people just complain about Sparkplug B on Discord? Is that the most helpful thing?
That's where Rick does it. Yeah. That's where Rick does it.
Yeah, that's real helpful.
What two-part question for you, Arlen.
Yeah.
What are we doing right now on the Sparkplug working group to try to make it easier for end users, vendors, even integrators to be a part? And what action would you like your end users to take that believe in Sparkplug with their vendors?
Right. So we are changing. So before, to join the Sparkplug working group, you had to become a member of Eclipse before you could join the Sparkplug working group, and it was pretty costly. So what we're setting up is more of a spark plug association,
Yeah.
where the entry level is a lot lower. We're going to make it to where part of the carrot, especially if you're a vendor, is we have a lot of vendors that have say they've implemented Sparkplug, but not quite. And they're still using the Sparkplug logo. So it'll make it, the carrot will be, hey, if you pass the TCK, you get the Sparkplug B logo to go along. So the Sparkplug logo, we won't call it B. So really, again, one of the people look at it and go, well, you know, a lot of people are just taking the work that we've done, all that work that CirrusLink has committed to the Sparkplug working group. Now, what Eclipse did for us, we now have an international standard. So Sparkplug is an ISO IEC international standard. And the next version of Sparkplug 4 coming out, they'll work through that same organization to get international standardization for that. I think the more, again, what we don't want is a version of, you know, you buy a vendor's software, you plug it in, and your system blows up, or you get into a rebirth storm, or anything like that. So, you know, if you don't do anything else, at least download the TCK and pass it. Because if you're not Sparkplug compatible, it will tell you where your problem is.
And by the way, I want to encourage, you know, I complain about standards all the time, but believe me, I didn't start bitching about OPC UA until I built a server and a client from scratch. I mean, until I wrote my own server, until I wrote my own client, I didn't start complaining publicly. So that when someone pushed back, I wasn't like, oh, I'm just complaining for no reason. It's no, I tried to implement this, and I was able to get these parts. I've also built a Sparkplug client, and I'll say this, you want to know the hardest part about implementing Sparkplug? It is fucking easy, dude. Seriously, it is so easy. The hardest part is protobuf encoding and decoding, and that's not even that hard. Like, it's just, that's the biggest hurdle you jump, is protobuf encoding, decoding. I mean, and even with OPC, making an OPC client or server is not that difficult as long as you go with bare bones OP, and I'm not using this part of the spec with my client, but I'm not using it with my server, right? Yeah. And I know we're out of time, but do we definitely want to get to some of these questions?
Yeah, no, we're going to shift and start hitting some of the questions. We're not going to hit every question, but we're going to hit the good ones. Yeah. How's that?
There was a really good one that flew by. I was like dying to answer.
Okay.
What do you think about a standard for namespace documentation? Yeah. That standard exists.
Yeah.
Come talk to me if you can't find it.
Oh, no.
So obviously the top one is what makes MQTT so popular for industrial applications, and why does it beat the likes of NATS, Kafka, or cloud provider message brokers? I mean, obviously we all have opinions here, but at the end of the day, it just doesn't get easier.
Right.
So
the simplicity of it.
The simplicity.
If we're talking pure MQTT, the spec is 18 pages long. Yeah. Like you said, I mean, most college kids can get MQTT up and running in a day. The other thing, why for industrial, is stateful. People don't realize they publish it and they subscribe, and then they go off and they go, whoa, where didn't you read the ping? And so it's stateful. So down at the bottom there's a death certificate, and that's how you know your MQTT session is up. So Andy and I had to figure out how to do report by exception, but know that the node was still out there to say, you know, in case something did happen. So that's really why MQTT is so popular in industrial, no matter where you look, is it kind of was designed for a mission-critical real-time pipeline control system.
But it was designed for that, yet a college student can pick it up.
Right.
And use it. So a big part of what SESME does is workforce development, and there is no faster way to illustrate the concepts that we're trying to communicate than see a sensor come to life on MQTT. Yep. Everybody here is using MQTT Explorer, which is a great piece of software. Yep. We use it all the time. Donate to the author. because it makes all of these concepts instantly visible.
And Thomas Norquist, who did MQTT Explorer, like he just does it on the side. I mean, it's a phenomenal tool, and he's a great guy. You should reach out to him and talk to him. I mean, he added Spark. He built Sparkplug support, took it out, and then added it back in. Had the group add it back in, and now Explorer completely decodes Sparkplug B natively as long as you're using the beta version.
Okay. That's why my version isn't doing
Yeah,
it.
you want to make sure you're using the beta version. It'll decode Sparkplug as long as it's Google protobuf encoded.
Let's look at.
There was one in there that was.
Yeah, we lost it. Where was?
There was a really good one that missed. Well, we deleted a question that was really. I don't remember. Do you remember what the second question was?
Once it's gone, it's gone.
Well, how do you balance theory with reality when it comes to protocols for Industry 4? Start with reality and find the theory that fits. I mean, what role do you see data formats as YAML or TOML or JavaScript, JSON playing in the UNS now and in the future? I would say they're inextricably linked now. JSON is probably, I think you guys would agree, JSON's the ideal payload format, I mean, for most.
Well, and people don't realize the protobuf encoded payload.
Yeah.
I mean, come on, that's JSON going in, and one line of Java code is JSON on the other side. So all we did was take the protobuf to get it down, because remember,
Just on the wire.
just on the wire, yeah. Because in our world, my notion is bandwidth is neither free nor unlimited.
JSON's actually a great example of imperfect being good enough.
Yeah, perfect.
To be, there's lots of things JSON could improve on, but it's good enough that we can use it.
Question of why not expand REST? Why write a new standard for an API with REST having the adoption it already has?
For one thing, I would say REST does not support subscription.
Yeah.
So if
I would say that's the reason.
Well, REST is a style of API. REST doesn't tell you what interfaces your API must have. And yes, it doesn't support subscription.
So I'm going to call REST, and it's going to collapse. Call it again, collapse. So this pull, talk about pull response.
Right.
That's what REST is. So I want an interface that I can connect, and then I get a stream of data coming back.
And by the way, there was a thing in there. Most vendors are already using REST for their API. That's because it's easy to bolt onto the API they're using internally in their software.
And again, it's a style of API that doesn't stop every vendor from having their own implementation of their API over REST with different interfaces.
Correct.
Our standard bottom question. Great. Are standards old news? If LLMs can do arbitrary translation between them?
No.
Absolutely not.
No.
That's a great question. It's an outstanding question, but it reveals gaps in the understanding of LLMs. So
It needs some assumed structures
Right.
to then
Correct.
be efficient.
Are you
It's,
not interested in running a factory with an LLM providing you perfect information all the time?
well, I mean, right now we're cheating it. We're getting around standards because large language models are trained on the way we talk,
Right.
on the way things are written, but that's the way we write is English, and English is a standard. I mean, grammar is a standard. So large language models are in fact being trained on.
Not only that, large language models benefit from a knowledge graph expressed explicitly on the semantic web. Like the training corpus for large language models was human language. We don't have a common language for industrial information. LLMs will benefit from the implementation of
I
standards.
agreed. In fact,
Yeah.
the results from our queries will drastically improve with standardization. And there was can you use a UNS in an environment that doesn't utilize real-time data? Absolutely. Absolutely. In fact, a descriptive namespace isn't real-time. In fact, a descriptive namespace is a model. It's a model that describes its sibling namespaces, and that oftentimes instantiates one time. And so then you make it, you always publish those messages into the UNS on connection, and you do that by retaining the message most of the time.
What are your thoughts on standardizing the namespace documentation, something like Swagger, for namespaces?
Yeah, that was the question that came by earlier. So we're all beating up on OPC because they have kind of a massive scope of things they're tackling, and it's fair to say some parts of OPC are tackled well and some maybe didn't need to be tackled at all, and some are maybe not tackled well. One of the parts that they tackled well was the idea that I should be able to declare my namespace independent of any implementation, even if that implementation doesn't use OPC UA. That's part 5 of the spec. It's much more than 18 pages, but it is independent of OPC UA. You can define your namespace in a standards-based format that you can exchange with Ignition, that you can exchange with HiByte, and have that document be authoritative, independent of your broker. It is a standard. It's a published standard. You can use it now, and you can see 160 examples that you may or may not use of namespaces defined using this standard.
And I would say anything that defines a namespace other than a Word document, that's more living.
It's an improvement.
As soon as you click save on that Word document, it's stale. It's out of date. So we need something else.
I've generally thought of UNS as somewhat analogous to a domain name server, DNS on the web. Thoughts? I would change that to alias topics in a unified namespace are generally analogous to a DNS on the web.
Sure.
Let's take 3 more questions.
Yep.
And then we'll wrap. Sound good?
Sure.
You knew it was going to come.
Yeah, there it is. We promise not to know wars here, but how do you see Sparkplug, that one?
Yeah, of course. What, we don't talk about politics, religion, or
MQTT versus OPC UA.
Right.
However, I'll say this. How do I see? I'm happy to answer it and have you guys
Well, let's
jump in.
read the question. How do you see Sparkplug compared to OPC UA PubSub?
Part 14, by the way.
Yeah.
But which one? Is it the Ethernet one, the UADP one? Is it MQTT one?
The MQTT one is what the question is. That's a good question. It's a good question.
It's a good question. So the answer is, here's my philosophy on OPC UA PubSub, Part 14. I think it was ill thought out when it was written, because there's a fundamental question, which is, if your recommendation to me is that I should use PubSub with OPC UA by transporting it over MQTT, which is your recommendation, then I have to come up with a reason to use OPC UA. And so my thought is that if I'm going to use OPC UA PubSub, it's because I want OPC UA. And if I'm going to use Sparkplug, it's because I want easier implementation, or I want to connect to things that talk Sparkplug. At the end of the day, I struggle with why you would ever use Part 14. I struggle with it. I really do. I've implemented it myself. I just think that it should be rewritten from scratch and strip out a lot of the noise.
Well,
but go ahead.
Wes and I worked, when Tom Burke was with the OPC UA, we worked with them for 2 years to try to get it into a reasonable form, but it's so political with IBM and Microsoft and everybody else that we find, well, when Stephen Hopp came in, we finally had just quit.
I think the answer is use the one protocol that your consumer can ingest.
It's the OPC.
So if you have a piece of software that can understand OPC UA, PubSub, MQTT, JSON, use it. If it can understand Sparkplug, you need to use that. If you have a piece of software that you can understand both, come tell me what that is, because I would love.
Hold on, let's not move on. I would like to be a little more generous and also a little more pragmatic. OPC UA client server has some challenges. One is that I need to pull. So if the architecture that I'm starting from is OPC UA, and it is not an option to replace that architecture with Sparkplug B, then it sure would be nice to have things published to me without me having to pull for it. From a pragmatic perspective, it is yet another format to decode when it arrives, but the world can handle a finite number of formats. We don't want an infinite number of formats, but pragmatically, I think Part 14 is an improvement or a nice augmentation to client server, and if it's present, I will take advantage of it. You may end up republishing it in another format. I see a lot of projects that republish. That's fine too. It needed to happen. We can quibble about whether it happened well, but if it's there, I would take advantage of it.
Especially if you want to use OPC. I mean, for sure.
Or you have to use OPC, especially if you have to use OPC.
I think it was only late last year that they finally standardized MQTT topic names within that standard. And if you talk to them, that's when it has really started to be standardized. To me, as an end user, I'm saying I'm waiting for the product to implement it.
That's right.
So then I'll consider it.
Let me say this one piece, and I think we definitely need to answer that
Question two?
second
Yeah,
question.
that's the one that we missed.
For sure.
Yep.
Because I think it's an important question. Here has always been my issue. The OPC Foundation has done very, very important work for our industry, especially when it was OPC DA. Its limitations, UA's limitations, are exactly what I was talking about in the keynote, that they carried over things from DA into UA that they should have never carried over. And that's been its albatross, right? And it's only gotten worse over time as the OPC Foundation tried to do more and more and more without focusing on adoption. So they ended up with a larger and larger standard that had more and more elements that very few people were using. And so then it created all this noise.
But the interplay with that legacy ties very much into the question that you want to answer next. They cannot abandon the DA legacy. They had to provide a path forward.
Correct.
Because
Yeah. So why are so many hardware manufacturers so hesitant to adopt MQTT, namely Sparkplug B? And first, are, in reality, that many hardware manufacturers hesitant to adopt MQTT or Sparkplug B?
I get emails every week on a new piece of hardware that does support MQTT Sparkplug. So I think the major players, it does become a political, it's hard for them politically, especially the big players, Allen Bradley, Siemens, for them to give up on OPC UA and go to MQTT. But
the interesting thing is one side of Siemens is all for MQTT, and the other side of Siemens is still.
But something interesting, there's a Beckhoff device that supports OPC UA to expose its EtherCAT terminals, as well as publish those terminal values over MQTT. So they supported MQTT on board. Please, would you support Sparkplug? Well, we're waiting for the OPC UA pub sub to get defined, and there's still no.
Arlen, did you have a thought you wanted to continue?
Oh, no.
Okay. I just want to throw this out there as we start to wrap up, because I get the last question.
Yeah. I do want to answer that piece there, though.
Okay, go ahead. And then I'll
I wouldn't mind answering.
Let's move along.
Jonathan, go ahead.
Before you get the last question.
Yeah, go ahead.
We deal with this a lot, not just MQTT or Sparkplug B or even the latest OPC spec. For a hardware vendor to take a decision to implement something in firmware that they will have to support for 40 or 50 years before they can sunset it requires voice of customer. So if you want it, you have to ask for it. You have to demand it. That's the only way that a risk-averse organization with a big legacy and a long commitment and support is going to move, is if you ask for it in a unified voice.
And I agree with that 100%. I think I'm going to answer the question from the perspective of you've asked for it, and yet they were hesitant to adopt it. Because I agree with Jonathan completely there. And I agree. The answer is mostly what Arlen said. It is in fact politics, especially from Rockwell Automation. I mean, let's just be honest. Rockwell didn't adopt Sparkplug for one reason and one reason only. It's because Ignition was kicking their ass, and they absolutely, under no circumstances, wanted to make it easier for people to migrate from Rockwell solutions to Ignition solutions by supporting Sparkplug. Okay, that's first and foremost. Wonderware also did the same thing. Wonderware was very hesitant because Wonderware, I mean, the fact of the matter is the #1 conversion in the world, still to this day, for 12 years, is Wonderware to Ignition. It is still the #1 conversion. And so there's a commercial element to it. But let's take that piece away. The fact of the matter is that if you have something that's working for your customers and you have an alternative that you're going to support, you have to justify where you're going to support that. You really do. And so if I'm going to take overhead in my firmware, right, and because it is, for each additional protocol you support, there's overhead.
Yep.
And it's not like software
Right.
that you can just kind of flip it. It's expensive to go upgrade and
I have to have a real reason to add that. I have to have a reason. It's not a feeling, it's not a gut, it's we're supporting this for X, Y, and Z reason. And so that's to Jonathan's point. So it is a combination of both. It's the customer needs to be asking. The customer doesn't need to be responding to what's available. You need to be, all you big players in here, I've seen this a million times. Toyota, I know y'all are here. Toyota told AWS and Azure what to do. And AWS and Azure said, how high? They said, you jump, and they both said, how high? The major players can drive adoption like that. Pioneer Natural Resources. Look at what inductive automation and Kepware did because Pioneer said, we need this.
That's right.
Yep.
Like that.
All right, so hypothetical world, the US government, the German government, they put a ton of money and they put a grant to their top 20 hardware and software manufacturing companies respectfully, and they say you will support Sparkplug in the next 18 months and you will get the big old check. You've got 100 individuals committing to Sparkplug. What does the forecast look like 5 years from now, 10 years from now, if that would happen?
So that if I walked out there, I wouldn't have to ask the question,
Do you
do you
Spark-
support,
yeah.
right?
Yep.
Oh, I think it'd be huge.
Yeah.
I mean, again, my vision always
Well, it would
was
drive
is
what you
that
guys are doing
if
even
you
more.
if you could walk in, plug in all your equipment. The guy from TE, Carl Voss. You knew Carl.
Voss, yeah.
Carl Voss's vision that whole time was, I want to walk into my factory, plug my laptop in with proper permission, open it up, and it learns the whole factory. Right? And that's really what you get with MQTT and Sparkplug B. Boom, the rebirth, everything comes in.
I'll follow it up. If that were to happen, we would see we have Sparkplug A, B, and 3 right now. We would see 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8 very quickly. That's another thing. If you had massive adoption, then we would be able to see the gaps more clearly, the patterns and the gaps more clearly, and we would be able to speed up the hardening of the standard.
Right, because right now we need committers,
Yeah.
we need people working on the spec, and we're doing everything that we can with the limited resources that we've got.
Standards are like laws. You notice our government passes laws but never repeals them. Okay? Standards is the same way. Once you take that step, it's pretty hard to go backwards, especially if somebody adopted it.
Yep.
All right. Are we doing an official wrap?
This was sick ass, man.
This
I hope
is-
this was really awesome for you guys.
This is the